Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Learning Enhancement Education webinar series. We're going to be getting started with our presentation here in just a few minutes. So while we prepare for that, I thought I would start by giving you some information about how we are going to proceed today. We are recording this session, and all of you will be getting a link to the recording once we have it posted. That takes about a week. We also will be sending you a copy of the PowerPoint and some additional items after the presentation, probably within the next day or so. So you can look for those things. As you are entering the room, you are muted, and we will be opening the phone lines at the end for questions as you raise your hands for questions. And we also will accept questions on the chat or the Q&A area at the right of their screen. So if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to type it in there, and we're going to handle all of those kinds of things at the end. So now I want to go ahead and get us started. So let me show you the screen. So now, welcome to Brain-Friendly Classroom Practices. With me today, I have Betsy Hill, Dr. Lou Whitaker, and we will all be presenting for you different parts about brain-friendly classroom practices. Easy for me to say. We want to start out with giving you just an idea of what we plan to talk about today. We're going to just briefly talk about what brains are actually seeking as we are using them or not using them, and then start with some strategies about using some games in your classroom, then talk about teaching students about their brains, and then we're going to close it off with a little bit about a Starfish strategy that Dr. Whitaker has created, and wrap it all together. And we are going to make sure that we stay on time. We know that you have committed an hour to this, so we are going to stay true to that. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to start talking about the most important thing in the classroom. We at Learning Enhancement believe that it's not just about the curriculum or the fabulous teachers in the room, but it's really about those individual brains in the room and the preparedness that those individual brains have for what they're about to learn. So that's really where we're going to start. And when we're talking about that, what we're talking about is learning about or preparing for what our brains are really interested in. There really are 8 things that our brains are always seeking to find and to search out and find interesting. And those things are patterns. We love patterns. That's part of the reason mysteries are always such a great thing, and puzzles, because we like to figure out what the patterns are. We like to seek out meaning. We like to figure out what things mean and to continue to explore. And that goes with the questions and meaning and patterns. And then there's also novelty. The idea that it's something you haven't tried before or there might be a twist to it is something that your brains really, truly like and that your students' brains like. And then the last 4 parts about what our brains are always seeking. Our brains like community. We like to feel part of an experience. We like to feel part of a classroom setting. We like to be active and participate. We don't like to just sit there and not be part of the group. We love security, and I love that picture of the baby in a blanket. That I wish that I had that blanket wrapped around me a lot of the time. And then we have the desire for feedback from people. And feedback can be positive or negative, but we want feedback. We want to know how we're doing, and we also want to be recognized. Those are things that we are truly interested in as we work and as we play and as we are in a classroom situation. And so from there, Betsy is going to now take that and connect it to what we're doing when we talk about games.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And I want to express my appreciation to all of you also for being here today and extend my welcome. When we talk, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk a little bit about games today, we tried to pick, the field of all the things you can do that are friendly to brains in a classroom is very extensive, and we obviously can't cover that in an hour. But we wanted to choose a couple of things that we thought would be really practical and really helpful and that we all use in various kinds of presentation, training, and classroom situations. So one of those that we want to talk about today is games. And the reason I wanted to talk about games is because they give our brains so much of what they want and need to be able to learn. When my kids were little, I discovered that everything was easier as a game, like singing a song and marching up the stairs to bed. And now I understand why they're so effective, and it's no wonder kids are so eager to engage in them, not just because they're novel and a break from the classroom as usual, but it's also an opportunity to develop all of the kinds of things that Sarah was just referencing, to build a community as they work in teams for active participation, not just sitting there passively, and, of course, for feedback. Games are really good at that. So each of those things are present in games, and this is also something that you can use, this list, as sort of a checklist to make sure that the games you incorporate into your classrooms are really hitting the mark in as many ways as possible and delivering the most beneficial learning experience to your students. When I was thinking about games last night, I was reflecting on some games. Actually, I played a game of Scrabble with my kids last night. They're now almost 30, so I have to work really hard just to stay up with them. But it occurred to me that the consequences of games and of real life are really sort of interesting to contemplate. We're talking about real life. The consequences of failure or success can be pretty severe. It might be hunger or embarrassment or even something far worse. But the consequence of failure in a game setting is learning. And that's one of the reasons that they can be some of the most effective tools that we have. But then the question becomes, how should we use them? What are we trying to accomplish? You may come up with some other ways to incorporate games, but these are three that are effective and that are supported by what we know about how the brain learns. So one of the first way to use games is to motivate and focus. One of the ways that to do this is with daily brain builders, brain teasers, mind benders, whatever you want to call them, little puzzles. I like to call them brain candy because they're something that really our brains enjoy, and they can be nice and brief. These are great things to start at the beginning of the day or at the beginning of your class when you need students to shift or even as a reward. But they're about getting everybody energized, on the same page, and focused in a way that is sometimes hard to do otherwise. So just a quick example to get all of our brains going. Can you find the shape? And Sarah's going to show it to you. And the shape on the left is concealed in the diagram on the right. And let's see if Sarah can show us where it is. I didn't tell her I was going to ask her to do that, but maybe she can figure that out.
Oh, that's not fair.
I know it's not. Well, anyway, if you look at the very middle top point, that is the top point of the shape. And then it goes left and right, slanting down from there, and you can probably see that shape. So a little bit of brain candy at the beginning of the day or the beginning of the class is really a lot of fun. If you can find a brain teaser that relates to the subject matter you're working on, so much the better, but not necessary. I think it's really great to use a variety of different types so that you're developing a variety of different kinds of cognitive skills, visual puzzles, wordplay, sequences, and patterns. Again, some of those terms that Sarah referred to about what brains really are always looking for. There are zillions of books and resources for teachers of these, and it's really fun to go look for them and explore. The second thing, besides motivating and focusing, is what I call practice and check. And when we want information or a process to become automatic, in neuroscience speak, we want it to become part of procedural memory, something that just is there when we want it to be able to do it. The way to develop those skills and to make those things automatic is to do them over and over and over again until those neural pathways are formed and strengthened. As the saying goes, of course, neurons that fire together wire together. So you want to get them firing together over and over again until they get set into that pattern. But, of course, drills just in and of themselves are boring. But fortunately, one of the nice things is that games can be drills in disguise. They can also serve to let you check in with the students and see how their learning and their mastery of the material is going along. So just to give you a couple of examples, and these are just a couple because the main point about games is that just about any game you have ever heard of can be adapted to classroom use. I learned this a couple of years ago from my youngest son. He had a summer internship working with a curriculum development company. He was in his early 20s at the time, which will make the rest of this probably make a lot of sense. And as he explained to me, his team would come up with all of the drinking games that they had ever played and found a way to incorporate them into classroom activities, of course without the alcohol. So think about some well-known games. Think about, Go Fish. Maybe a game that you think of as being a game for very young children, but if you can adapt it for colors or numbers or letters for kindergarten and first graders. So do you have a red card? Do you have a blue card? That kind of thing. But think of ways that this can be adapted even for older ages. Imagine Go Fish for elementary math. Do you have a card that equals 10 with various kinds of equations, basically, that add up to a particular number, a variety of different numbers? Think of it as even a more sophisticated conceptual level in a high school course where, for example, Western European history, do you have a 17th century monarch or a country in which French is spoken? Pictionary, of course, is a fabulous way to practice vocabulary, language arts, ELL, foreign languages, but also subject matter areas that have vocabulary that we want our students to learn. The great thing about Pictionary is that it actually requires you to come up with the word, not just to recognize it. So particularly when you're trying to make sure that those concepts are eliciting the vocabulary that you want, that can be a lot of fun. Jeopardy is one of my very favorites, and I use it a lot. We have a simple PowerPoint template that actually allows us to play Brainware.
Are you seeing it?
I see Brainware. I hope that's the one I did. Must be, right?
It must be right.
Okay. So we thought we'd just give you a very quick example of how this can be. No, that's not. Well, that's all right. We can work from this. It's not the one I had, but this is an example of one that we use that deals with a variety of kinds of. Oh no, this is right. Never mind. I forgot how clever I was. Okay, so if we look at the ones that where there are actually questions for, and you're all probably familiar with Jeopardy, so they're 100-point up to 500-point questions. And let's start with brain anatomy and function for 100, if you please, Sarah. The approximate weight of the average human brain. Now, I know that Sarah knows the answer to this question. I know that Dr. Whitaker knows the answer to this question. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that the question is, what is 3 pounds? Because, of course, we have to answer Jeopardy challenges with a question. All right, how about brain anatomy and function for 200? We should have people type the answers in. The cells that are connected together to transmit information in the brain.
Anybody want to type? Anybody want to type the answer? And Lou, you're not included.
You're not eligible.
Okay, we'll go on. Neurons.
What are neurons?
And so that you know how this is set up in this template, because we are going to send you a copy of the template, the little home button is down at the bottom after you reveal what the answer, what the question is for the answer in the Jeopardy terms there, clicks you back to the grid.
All right, let's just do one more.
Okay. Let's do cognitive skills.
Well, no, actually, we have to do brain anatomy because those are the only ones that I filled in this.
Oh, okay. Brain anatomy for 300.
Sure. the part of the brain that is your stop and think center. So this is the part of the brain where you make decisions, where you inhibit impulses, where you plan, strategize, and all those kinds of things. And so, of course, the correct answer is going to be, what are your frontal lobes? Anyway, so that gives you an idea of doing that. Now, one of the challenges, of course, with all of these is that it can be a fair amount of work to develop some of these games. And this is where the third use of games come in. So we talked about motivating and focusing. We talked about practicing and checking, because you can both practice and see how your students are doing with the information that you want them to know. But elaborating and extending really is something that, instead of making it harder, it actually makes it easier for the teacher, because the students can create the games. The best way to learn is to teach, and Dr. Whitaker is going to come back and talk about that some more in a little bit. And when students are creating the games, of course, they're becoming the teachers. They have to think about, what is a $500 question compared to a $100 question? What makes a question more difficult? They have to think, when they're creating a Jeopardy game, for example, about how you cover all of the important material, what's important to cover, what's not important to cover. In designing the game, sometimes they can even design the rules of a particular game, and can get into issues of teamwork and fairness, how you create community, how you create accountability, how you're clear on what the rules are. And it also allows them to become aware of some of their own gaps, to really reflect on their own learning and have a better sense for how they're learning, perhaps even to figure out areas where they need to be reinforced. There's just one other aspect of games that I want to talk about just a little bit this afternoon, and that's the question of video games. I get asked this a lot because of what we do in our Brainware Safari Cognitive Skills program, which looks and feels to students like a video game. Some educators are embracing video games, others shun them. Kids love them. We hear a lot about video games helping to develop this skill or that skill, like eye-hand coordination or strategy or something. But, of course, the question is always, is this pedagogically sound? And how do you explain the fact that you want to play video games, if that's what you do, in your classroom? So we have developed some questions that we think really help answer that question and allow you to have a solid rationale for using a particular video game or video game-like program. What these questions really come down to is whether a video game that just happens to lead to skill improvement, or whether it really has been designed to deliver an improvement in specific skills that are relevant to learning. So, for example, if we take Brainware Safari and use that as sort of an example, the skills that are developed are 41 cognitive skills in attention and memory that all relate directly to students' capacity to learn. Is there evidence, research published, and real world? Of course, we want to make sure that it's working in the classroom, that those skills are improved. Is there a defined protocol for using the program? If it's just haphazard use, then it's unlikely that it's really going to be developing something, and there should be a specific way of using this program, a specific amount of time or frequency that is defined that actually is shown to develop the skills that are being targeted. Some other areas that are inherent in sort of the video game format are whether the challenge increases, whether the game is motivating, whether it's really effective in reinforcing skills that aren't as well developed yet, all of that adaptiveness to the individual student's needs. And, of course, consideration about the extent to which it is supporting all of your students. So those are some good questions to ask about any game for that matter, but it particularly is applicable to video games because of all of the discussion that goes on about them, but they can be an extremely effective way to develop skills if they have appropriate answers to all of these kinds of issues. So what I'd like to do now is to turn you over to Dr. Lou Whitaker, Lou is principal of two schools in Florida, Pope John Paul II and Notre Dame Catholic School in Lecanto, Florida. And she is a member of Pat Wolf's Brainy Bunch. If any of you know Pat Wolf, she wrote the book Brain Matters, which is published by ASCD. And Lou is just the most energetic, wonderful person, and I think you'll start to appreciate that. And I'm not going to say any more. Lou, it's all yours.
Thank you, Betsy. I appreciate that. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing?
Great, Lou.
I want to just welcome all of our attendees. Very impressed with the number of teachers that are out there and administrators that are interested in this fascinating topic and things that we all want to learn about, becoming better teachers, working with our students. Before I get into teaching about their brains to our children, I want to kind of dovetail on what Betsy was talking about in the games. And I remembered probably one of the best examples was a couple of years back when we received our first smart board. And you know how exciting that is to use that technology. And it was right around Christmas vacation. And we were having our Christmas parties, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, what are we going to do? We need to play some games. And so the teacher goes, I know, let's play this snowman game. And this was a 5th grade class, and she brought up a game of snowmen and snowflakes falling down, and they had to do multiplication, division, and so forth, and answer it before the snowman melted. Well, lo and behold, 45 minutes later, the kids absolutely loved the game. The party ended, and they're like, can we play this some more? In reality, they had been actually doing drills for over 45 minutes. Now, you can imagine the difference if the teacher walked in at the end of the Christmas party and said, all right, take out your papers and we're going to do math drills for 45 minutes, what that result would be. So I think Betsy really hit it on the head when she's saying you're taking your basic information but just changing the format. So really motivates the students. But I really love Betsy's examples and so forth. I want to go into now teaching students about their brains and why it's important for our students to learn about them. Once a child understands how their brain works, they'll be able to improve their study skills, to understand how they learn, and then eventually improve their student achievement. And isn't that our goal of both the teachers and the students? We as educators, as teachers, we really should be concentrating, understand the real detail of how the brain functions so we can learn the different techniques to help them retain this information. And we always wonder, well, why does this technique work and not the other one, and so forth. So now you're seeing more and more teachers really becoming more aware of this and really using the brain-based techniques that really help us in the classroom. We start teaching as early as the little guys, as early as, the early childhood 3- and 4-year-olds. And I really wanted to show you some cute photographs of our students. The bottom ones, for example, they do their little head, and the front, the face part, is there if they have blue eyes, and they put on the blue eyes or their mouths or whatever color hair there is. But then when they turn it around, you can see as they study about the brain, they begin to show what is actually happening inside their brains. They will label it with dendrites and neurons and how they learn and where reading comes in and where math comes in. So you might think, well, they're awfully young to be learning this, but you will be amazed. In fact, our 4-year-old class, we had a special open house for our parents, and we call it Night at the Museum, and every classroom is changed into a different topic. And our 4-year-old class did the human brain. So when you walked into the 4-year-old class, you saw dendrites hanging from the ceiling, and the children could actually explain what they were. So how do you introduce this to the little guys? Well, the first thing we do when we meet with the children is I ask them, so what do you know about the brain? And that's a simple question that you ask all students, even if they're adults. But the little guys, what can you tell me? Where is it? What do you know about it? What does it do? And so forth. And I think that you'd be surprised at the information, even as young as 3 and 4. They do understand that information is in your head, and we got to figure out now how does that information actually get in there. It stores information, and it helps us learn. But how do we get in there? How does the information get in there? And so I'll meet with the children, and I bring in, because like Betsy said, you want to get them engaged. You want to get them as active as you possibly can. So we start, for example, saying, all right, let's talk a little bit about touch. And I will hold a pillow and a piece of sandpaper, and I show it to the children, and I said, all right, boys and girls, which one is soft and which one is smooth? And they can tell me without touching it that they know that the pillow is very soft and that the sandpaper is rough. And all right, well, let's go around and see if your brain has that information. So please hold out your hand, and as I walk by, I'm going to rub your hand with either the pillow or the sandpaper, but your eyes are closed so you can't peek. And then you tell me what it is. And sure enough, one at a time, I'll rub them with the sandpaper and they'll go rough. Or I'll rub them with the pillow and they'll go smooth, soft. I said, okay, good. And we go through the whole class. Everybody gets a turn. And then I'll say to them, well, how did you know that that was rough? How did you know it was smooth? Your eyes were closed. You couldn't see it. How did you know? And the hands pop up. He says, because our hands are telling us. We can feel it in our fingertips. And I said, yes, you feel it in your fingers. And the little information goes from your fingertips, and then you just walk your fingers all the way up into your brain, and the information gets up into your brain. And it tells you whether it is sandpaper, if it's rough, or if it's soft. We go into smell. I take an air freshener and said, I'm going to spray this over your head. Now, nobody say anything, but then I'm going to ask you what it smells like. Sure enough, I'll spray it, and they'll right away raise their hands. Oh, it's pumpkin. It's Halloween. I said, all right, that's good, but how do you know that? It's invisible. I said, because information's coming in. I said, where is it coming in? It's coming in through my nose. And so, again, we walk our little fingers from our nose all the way up into our brain. With hearing, the same idea. I said, listen closely. What is it? And you'll hear an owl hooting. What did you hear? And they go, it's an owl. I said, all right, well, what's this sound? And then it'll be a fire truck or an engine. So, well, how did you know this was an owl? I said, because information came into our ears and it's stored up in our head. All right. Then we get into the taste and the sight, and this is their favorite because I use M&Ms. And with the taste, I ask them to hold up their hand and close their eyes. And I'm going to put a piece of candy or put something. I didn't say candy, excuse me. I put something in your hand, but don't look and don't say to anyone what you think it is. And at the count of 3, you're going to put it into your mouth. So I pass it all out, and their eyes are closed, and they go 1, 2, 3 to put it in their mouth. And I say, okay, great. How was it? Was that pizza? How was your pizza? And they go, no, it's not pizza. What is it? It's candy. I said, well, how did you know that was candy? And obviously, because that information is in your head, it's in your brain. And then for sight, I give them another M&M, but nobody, just hold it and look at it. On the count of 3, tell me the color. And when I say 3, and they all shout red or brown or yellow, I say, wait a minute, wait. You're saying yellow and you're saying brown. How come? Aren't they the same? And they go, no, the colors are different. I said, well, how do you know that? Where is that information coming from? How does it get into your brain? It goes from my eyes all the way back up into my brain. So they begin to understand, and just showing them this model, for example. And I do want to mention, because I immediately thought of that 4-year-old class. She actually had this and printed out on big placemats. And the children took colored clay and put it in the different sections of the brain, and then she was so clever, Mrs. Mary Clark. She actually took Mr. Potato Head pieces, like hearing, and she stuck it. The children would stick it into that region of the brain. This is an excellent lesson of getting them involved, very active. So then this naturally leads into, so if our brains are so important, what do we do to protect them? You think it's important to protect our brains. And it leads right into a safety lesson. And so I bring in all the different helmets and bring in different hats. And I'll put on, for example, the motocross hat. And I said, is this a good helmet? And I'd knock it, a bit. And they said, yes, or a football helmet. And we get to try them all on, of course, and especially the bicycle helmets. And I said, well, what about this? And I'll put on a baseball cap. No, that doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? Because it's not protecting your brain. And so, we just try and make this as easy to understand and why it's so important. And then I go right into how many of you do wear helmets when you ride your bicycle. And luckily, it's great. They are wearing them. And that leads us into seatbelts. Why would you have to wear a seatbelt in a car? What does that have to do with your head? And the children will know. I said, because it holds you back because you'll crash your head otherwise. So they begin to get that introduction of why we want to protect our brains and why our brains are so important. But now I want to just move ahead a little bit and talk about the adolescent brain. and this one in particular, they really want to know, why do I have to learn this? How is this going to help me? And so forth. So when I meet with the students, we talk about their brains and explain that when information comes in, different parts of the brain are activated. So they're old enough to understand what a PET scan is, a positron emission tomography, and that actually you can take a photograph of, like, inside your brain, and you can see different regions lighting up as they're being activated. So then we show them this next slide, which I think is so important, not only for our children, but for our teachers. This is absolutely critical. This is the most important teaching strategy for you to understand, and I'd recommend you cut this out and paste it to the front of your lesson plan book. And you can get copies. This is from the Dana Foundation, and what it is, it's a PET scan, and you can see as the person really is facing to the left, what regions of the brain are being activated or lighting up when they're doing different things. For example, as you're hearing my voice, the temporal regions right by your ears are lighting up, and that's why it's in that bright yellow. So it's showing that it's being activated. When you're looking at something, the occipital lobes, or the lobes in the far back, are actually lighting up to yellow when you say seeing words. So it's the occipital lobes. So obviously, as I'm speaking, and you are looking at the slides, you are activating the top two slides. Does this make sense, students? Okay. Now, that's only activating the two parts. Now, when you're speaking, if, for example, I was asked to read something in class, there's another region of the brain that begins to activate, the parietal region. But when you really have to stop and think and create your answer in the classroom, that's when you activate the frontal lobes. So you can see how that is lit up in that drawing and so forth, because you're generating words. Now, doesn't it make sense, boys and girls and teachers, that the more parts of the brain that you can activate, the better chance you have of remembering information? All right? That's why when you look at the top two in particular, that is the worst form of instruction. That is straight lecture. Okay. And I ask the students, who is the smartest one in the classroom? That's very easy. It's the teacher. Why? Because the teacher's walking around the room and is activating all four regions of the brain. She's hearing, she's seeing the kids, she's looking at the board, she's reading stuff, she's generating words. So she's activating more and more. So doesn't it make sense, teachers are like, oh my gosh, how many times do I have to go over this lesson? Well, yeah, you're the one that's learning. You're activating more parts of the brain. So we as educators have to figure out how can we activate more regions of the brain. And truthfully, if you really want to learn something, you have to teach it. And then I go into this next thing, talking about in particular my son Andy. And I love telling this story because I think it really hits home. When my son Andy was in high school, he wasn't a very bright student, obviously took after his father, but anyway, and not me. Anyway, he got C's. He was a C student. You know, once in a while got a B, once in a while got a D, but nothing to write home about. And he decided he wanted to go into airframe mechanics at first, and he went to a junior college for a year, and then he decided, you know, Mom, I think college is not for me. So then he dropped out of school for a few years. And then all of a sudden he realized, he says, you know, I wish I had stuck it out. I really know how important education is, and I really would like to get my degree. So I said, all right, we're down here in Florida. Let's get you back in school and so forth. Well, he was a little nervous because he knew he was going to be older than the rest of the students because he's, you know, by now is 4 years older than the kids in the freshman class. But he enrolled at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which you know is a very good school down here in Florida. And so all of a sudden, Andy starts bringing home A's on everything, A's and B's. And I said, Andy, what is going on? You could barely get through high school, and you're getting A's at Embry-Riddle. What is going on? He goes, Mom, it's incredible. I meet in this study group, and because I'm a little bit older and I had a year of junior college, you see, they kind of ask me questions. And so what I do is I think about it, and then I answer them, and we review one in class. So I just kind of go over and over and over again, and I kind of teach it to them. And what happens is when I go to take my test, all of a sudden, all this comes back to me. I can remember the answers. And I went, this is it. This is a perfect example. And I do tell my sons, my students rather, that Andy now is a mechanical engineer for Walt Disney. Thank you, because of this way. He had to take a test for Disney. All engineers have to take a test, and he was worried about studying for this test. And I said, Andy, what do you have to do? And he goes, I know, Mom, I have to teach it. I have to teach it to somebody. I said, exactly. And he passed his test, and he's got a high salary because of this. So I tell our children, if you really want to learn something, you have to teach it. So the kids will go, well, how do I teach it? You mean I have to stand in front of this whole group and teach it? I said, no. You can teach it to your little brother or sister. You can teach it to mom or dad. And this is a hint, teachers. Share this with your parents. How should I study with my child? Parents, don't just sit there and say, okay, what was the year of the Civil War? Who was the president? No. You play the student, and your child is the teacher. You go, I don't understand what the Civil War was all about. My gosh, what was going on? When was this? Who was in charge? Who was the president? How did the people feel about it? You act as if you know nothing about it. And the child begins to elaborate and teaches you, activating more parts of the brain, being able to remember more and more stuff. So I said, this is what you need to do, study with mom or study with younger brother or sister. And they go, my brother's only 4. He doesn't know how to diagram a sentence. And I said, he's not the one learning. You are. And I said, who is the best student in the house? And that's your family dog. Your family dog. You can go up there, boys and girls, you sit down with your family dog, and you teach your dog your spelling words. And that dog, it will be amazed at how this all turns out. And sure enough, a 4th grader comes running up. Mrs. Whitaker, I got to tell you something. I said, what? I said, I'm teaching my dog to spell. I go home every night. I go, Rex, okay, the first word is clock. C-L-O-C-K. Say it, clock, spell it. And I look at my dog, and he pants. And I know he's spelling it in his head. I'm like, okay, good. And he goes, Mrs. Whitaker, I'm getting A's. And now my dog can spell. I said, well, there you go, okay? So it's this whole idea of to activate more parts of the brain. It's reciprocal teaching. So students, teachers, what you need to do is you teach a small section of class, and you pair them up with a partner. And you stop and say, all right, I want the person on the right side to stand up. Now you explain what you just heard in class. And then you stop and say, all right, now switch it. Now you're the teacher and the other one's the student. So everyone has that practice of the reciprocal teaching. So that's just probably one of the most important and easiest strategy that we can do. There's tons of strategies out there, and that's going to actually lead us right into what I've created. They're called Starfish Strategies, and all really it is, it's adapted because of this little saying. And so we're going to go through this so you are aware of the story, and we'll read it to you. But then I think you'll understand how this impacts the classroom. So, Sarah, if you want to take it from there?
Sure. Let's read this together, ladies. I'll start. Like we planned. Once upon a time, there was a wise man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had a habit of walking on the beach before he began his work. One day, as he was walking along the shore, he looked down the beach and saw a human figure moving like a dancer. He smiled to himself at the thought of someone who would dance to the day, and so he walked faster to catch up. As he got closer, he noticed that the figure was that of a young man, and that what he was doing was not dancing at all. The young man was reaching down to the shore, picking up small objects, and throwing them into the ocean. He came closer still and called out,
Good morning. May I ask what it is that you are doing?
The young man paused, looked up, and replied,
Throwing starfish into the ocean.
I must ask then, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean?
Asked the somewhat startled wise man. To this, the young man replied,
The sun is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them in, they'll die.
Upon hearing this, the wise man commented,
But, young man, do you not realize that there are miles and miles of beach, and there are starfish along every mile? You can't possibly make a difference.
At this point, the young man bent down, picked up another starfish, and threw it into the ocean. As it met the water, he said,
It made a difference for that one. I love when I found this little saying, this little poem. I thought it was excellent because as educators, sometimes we get overwhelmed. How am I going to teach all this? How am I going to reach all of these children? And so many times when I do workshops, they say, well, what are the very best teaching strategies? Just give it to me real quick. Just give me the top ones. And so what I did was I put them all together, and there's actually 27 different teaching strategies. And so, and then if you take the first initial of each one, it actually spells out, the starfish. But what we really want to try and do is to concentrate on just making an impact, just that one student, that one teaching strategy. So, for example, the very first one, reciprocal teaching, that was the one I just explained, and the importance of having one person teach it and one child teach it and then the other one. It's really too long to try and to keep all this in your head, so we will send you the entire list, and then at another webinar we'll be happy to go into more detail. But I just wanted to give you a taste of what they were, and to sometimes remember, don't get overwhelmed. You're just going to do that one little starfish, one at a time. Okay? Just like your students, teachers need time to think and plan, and that's why in this webinar in particular, we didn't want to overwhelm you. We wanted you to just get a taste of some ideas, starting with games, starting with teaching in your classroom, how do I introduce this? How much should I teach our children about their brains? You start, first of all, by saying how much do they really know about their brains? But it's all geared towards eventually improving your student achievement. So I thought, what can we give you also as a tool that you could use? And so I actually designed a lesson plan format that our teachers here use, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, it just talks about what is the teaching strategy. For example, in that very first one that we did with the reciprocal teaching, it's the teaching strategy is for the students to have a chance to actually explain and teach and practice this reciprocal teaching. The first time you do it, by the way, you ask them to stand up, they're going to be in shock like, what? I mean, I really had to be paying attention. I said, yeah. Now they know. Once I come into a classroom, they go, you better pay attention because she's going to ask us to turn to a partner and teach. So you put your strategy up on top, and then what is the objective of the lesson, the description, what supplies you need. We're all on standards and benchmarks, whether you're a diocesan school, a state school, or whatever. And so you can also, these fall right into this, because no matter what the benchmark is, you can always find a strategy to pair up with it. And many times you'll be doing a lesson, and you hit 4 and 5 strategies in there. But it's really nice to, at the bottom, you list your resources, and you put this in your bag of tricks. At the bottom, the evaluation of lesson, not just yourself. You ask the kids, so how do you think you did? Did you learn anything from this? Why do you think it's important for us to talk about it to one another and teach one another? So, feel free to go ahead and use this format. As I said, it's pretty easy to fill in and go straight forward. But then going to the next step, as administrators or teachers in your school, you're always looking for ways to help observe and evaluate. So all I did was I put together all these 27 different teaching strategies, and you certainly can design your own. And then you have someone come in and observe while you're teaching this lesson. I think we have to realize that we're all in the same, we all have the same goal, so it does not have to be a principal to come in and evaluate. You ask a team teacher to come in and say, I just want your opinion. I'm going to try this different strategy. I'm going to try getting feedback given to the learner, or an analogy or metaphor, and I'd like your opinion on this. You ask the children their opinion. I always have my teacher's aides. My teacher's aides teach. They learn how to do the lessons. They understand why it's important. And truthfully, our teacher's aides do a fantastic job because they spend that extra time doing that one lesson or 2 lessons a month. And then the teacher evaluates them. It's a great feedback because, again, the brain is always looking for feedback. So you'll be able to use this. And that's really kind of bringing it all together. Sarah or Betsy, should I turn it back to you for a while?
I'll take it. So, hi, everyone. I realized at the beginning I didn't introduce myself. I was so busy introducing Betsy and Lou. I'm Dr. Sarah Sawtelle, and I'm the Director of Scientific Affairs with Learning Enhancement Corporation. But today I'm just the moderator. What we really wanted to get across today is that our brains like pattern and novelty, feedback, participation, and the games can provide that, and the kind of teaching strategies that Lou was talking about can also provide that. Understanding how your brains work can help you learn a little bit more, but we also know, as adults and as people who have been around the world a little bit, it's sometimes hard to change a pattern, or AKA a habit. So don't try to do more than you can change at a time. It takes some time to change that. So if you want to try something new, plan on doing a new strategy a month. Get an observation in by a peer or a principal. Collect your information about how it's going, and then continue to move on and revise. Those old patterns can be replaced by new ones. It just takes hard work. And use what you've learned about the brain, because you know what? In that classroom, the students aren't the only ones with a brain, as Lou so eloquently pointed out. So we want to now I meant to put a thank you slide in there, and we don't have one there. So we're going to go ahead and take questions now. And let me, I have to multitask, so it's going to take me a minute to get back where I wanted to get. All right. So we have one question, and I'm not sure the detail about the question. It's from Opal Hill, and she asks, would you suggest this for a deaf student? And I think that was regarding Lou's reciprocal teaching. I think that's when the question came in. So I guess, Lou or Betsy, any comments about using these strategies with deaf students?
You know, it's interesting. I was actually invited to give a workshop, and they were all deaf teachers. And I was like, I don't know sign language. I don't know how to do this. They had interpreters there with me the whole time. These strategies really, really do help. Obviously, there's someone else in the room, for example, with that deaf student. They can still sign and give back that information that they just learned in that lesson, no matter what the lesson is. Ask them to sign back or to try and explain it, because obviously they're not the only one in the classroom. So, yes, it can be done.
Okay, and now...
Betsy. I just wanted to add a little bit, which is that I think what we understand about the brain is that if someone who's deaf probably has more area in their brain dedicated to sight and touch and smell and other senses, but the processing of a lot of things takes place in the same parts of the brain that it does for others. And so, for example, blind people use the vision parts of their brain when they're reading Braille. And so helping them and being particularly conscious to appeal to a variety of senses for those who can't depend on the ones that we all use as our primary methods of getting it, I think is particularly important.
Great. And now we have another question about, in light of brain research and the importance of teaching with cognitive skills in mind, what can you tell teachers and administrators facing a state-driven change in standardized tests given to students at the end of the school year? How do these strategies, I guess my interpretation of that question, how are these strategies that we're talking fitting into what the states are wanting us to teach our students?
They fit right in, and this is kind of interesting because I am doing some research right with Brainware Safari software and looking at their cognitive skills. And again, because it's all games and so forth that the children are playing, we gave them the COGAT test at the beginning of the year. This is third graders, by the way, at both Pope John Paul and Notre Dame. And then we gave them the COGAT scores again at the end. And they are currently being analyzed, so I can't give you real statistical information at this point, but just at a glance, I could see the improvement in their learning patterns and so forth. So although it's not, you will see a difference in improvement in their attitude as well as thinking patterns and so forth by using a lot of this brain research.
Yeah, I think they do fit very well, but because we know that students actually, when they have learned more thoroughly, will actually be able to retrieve that information and perform better on tests. It is also the case that the trends clearly seem to be in developing the new Common Core standards and new assessments, that the focus is going to be less on spitting information back, regurgitating it, so to speak, and much more on thinking and problem solving and using and applying. And so the more opportunities we give our students to do those things, to really integrate, to really understand meaning and to create meaning for themselves, the better they're going to be able to perform on those kinds of activities.
Sarah, can I just kind of mention something? You talked about state recommendations and so forth, and I do just want to point out to our teachers, we always have to show a credibility and so forth, especially if you're going through accreditation for your school, or if you're looking for special state funding, or if you want your continuing education points. You have to prove, okay, I went to a workshop, and how is this being implemented in the classroom? Just this simple little handout that you're getting that shows an evaluation of the classroom lesson, and you could actually do your own little action research in the classroom. Compare to this lesson. Try teaching it a different way and gather that. I'm sure that the school, I would love if my teachers walked in and said, look, I'm doing my own action research in the classroom, and this is what I'm finding with this strategy as compared to that strategy. So you've got some things that you can really use.
Okay. The next question that has come in is a question about, we covered information from the little guys all the way up to 8th grade, but the question is, how do you get high school students to buy into new ideas about their brains?
I tell them that story about my son with Disney, and as an adult, here he is, a mechanical engineer, and he had to go and take those tests. And if you didn't pass the test, you were on one salary scale, and if you're on another test, and so forth. Our high schools, for example, another strategy is to use colors. Very simple. All students should be taking notes in 4 different color pens because the brain retains color as well as information. And we had a high school student that went and was having difficulty in Spanish. She was having a real struggling time, and she worked out her own basic patterns. I said, just have her take notes in colored pens. She wrote all of her verbs in red, all of her nouns in orange, and so forth. And all of a sudden, she said, it's amazing. I go to take my test, and the colors appear in my mind's eye. And so our high school kids will start picking this up. Not only high school, in college. If I had known a lot of these techniques, stop and think about yourself as a learner. If I had learned so many of these, I know I could have been a much better student, retained more information. So they're much more open to it than I think you realize. But you have to explain why. You can't just go in there. Nothing's worse than the study skills. All right, guys, let's skim through here, and I want you to just look at all the highlighted words, and then we're going to read the questions at the back, blah, blah, blah. You start with the game. You throw something up there to get their attention, and then you show how that game relates exactly to their learning patterns, and that's what captures them.
I think another important thing, when I talk to high school age students or college age students and even many adults, there is a lot of misinformation about the brain because a lot of us have grown up with some common misunderstandings based on what people thought, but there are a lot of people who continue to believe that intelligence is fixed and that you really can't change that. And I actually find that younger kids sometimes it becomes much more natural to them to believe that they can actually change their brains, that they can change how their brains function. The concept of using multiple intelligences and learning in a variety of different ways. And there are some exercises and some they're like optical illusion kinds of things that you can actually use with older students, and some trivia that can sort of help them realize that maybe they need to think about things a little bit differently. And sometimes that's an important, just a Mythbusters kind of approach initially may be helpful with older students.
I know as a former chemistry teacher, I used to use some of these techniques before I really knew why they were so effective, but it was more about getting the right response and activity from my students and interest from there, and then later learning that I was actually doing the right thing. But one thing that I always used to do with my older students that got them thinking about how they inquire about things and work through things was I used to take them through the scientific method of asking a girl out on a date, or of how they decided that they wanted to play football, or how they decided that they wanted whatever was interesting them, and showed them that they were automatically using their brain and making decisions in a really scientific way. And many times it's just gathering that interest that is all they need, especially as the older students.
That's great.
Okay, so another question. We have a bunch coming in, and I think we probably only have time for a couple more. But another question that seems to be relevant or keep coming up is questions about can music help the brain learn? What role does music play in the brain-friendly classroom? And there is also a question that says that they heard that there's a music CD that a child plays while working helps his brainwaves sync to optimum learning waves. And I thought maybe you guys would like to comment on those things.
I would love to, because this is one area in particular, when Betsy was talking about misinformation and so forth, we have to be very careful. First of all, I absolutely love music in the classroom when it is used properly. And very few teachers know how to use it properly. For example, an excellent use, instead of hearing the 4-year-old teacher, the teacher of the 4-year-olds, turn around and say, okay, let's pick up your toys, let's do this. I have a teacher that has a cleanup song, and it's a high energy. She puts the music on, and I'm in there, and I'm talking to one of the students. The music came on, and it's like I disappeared. The student leaves me. They all start picking up the room. They get going. They know they have 3 minutes and 22 seconds to pick up the room and then be seated on the square. I mean, it's perfect classroom management skill. Music can motivate kids when they're really down and it's a gloomy day out and you want them energized because they just got back from lunch. You can put a song on for 2 minutes and so forth. Be very careful of when you hear like the Mozart effect. I love Mozart. I love his music. But if you really read his research, and you even talk to the gentleman who did all the research, it's been misinterpreted. The research is basically saying if you listen to Mozart, that you'll improve your learning. Nothing could be further from the truth. It really, what it does, it is 60 beats a minute. It's the same as your alpha brain waves. They don't know the connection between music and the brain yet, okay, and so forth. But and they're still getting there. But this whole idea, of just being able to listen to Mozart and think that your kid's going to be a genius is a shame, because it couldn't be further from the truth. You can put music on very softly, for example, when they're studying, and that's nothing more than Pavlov conditioning. When you hear that music, it means no talking and we're quietly working, and that can be effective. But be very careful of, just the idea of, well, if you listen to this music while you're doing your homework, your scores are going to be higher. Be very careful of it, because there's absolutely no research that will back that.
It's also sometimes very hard for students that have severe ADD to necessarily filter out the music.
Yes.
So you kind of have to be careful about what your goal is with adding music in, especially if you have situations like that.
Good point. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another question is, really, I think this is one that Betsy might be able to address first. It's my high school students love to play games, but when they get frustrated when the questions cover fairly new material. What can we do to help this?
I think actually that turning it around, and part of it is frequency and repetition, and so but turning it around and having them work on some of the questions, having the students develop, and maybe you have a bank of questions or a bank of topics or however that game is structured that you develop over the course of the school year, and you have the students work together to add some questions on the most recent material. You have them do, as Lou was suggesting, some reciprocal teaching, check each other. And if you do that every, couple of days or something on some new material, that's what you'll find after 2 or 3 times that it won't be that new anymore, because they will have had the kinds of repetition. But I think getting them to elaborate and think about it and create those questions, and then testing each other a little bit before it becomes maybe the broader game might be good strategies.
I just want to mention that with the, Betsy, the Jeopardy game is perfect, because you start off with very easy questions, the $100 ones, and then you build. If you throw those tough questions out right at the beginning, it's going to cause a block. And that's how video games are built. when you start playing a game, if the game is real simple, then they'll drop it. It's too simple. I don't want to play it. If the game is too hard, forget it. I don't want to play it. And so what happens is you do one level, you get that motivation, okay, I conquered that one, and then it gets a little bit harder, and that's what keeps you moving, and that's what gets you hooked.
The last comment about that, and then we have to wrap it up because our time is up, is also keep in mind that sometimes we have to be frustrated to learn, and it's a very hard thing to do, but there is a level of frustration that your brain needs because it's got to work things out. So you can't have a total frustration-free environment. You have to have it controlled, and you have to make sure that you're monitoring it correctly for them too.
I think that's a great point, Sarah, because then not leaving it at the point of frustration, but giving them an action that they can take to help resolve that frustration would be another thing. Okay, pick the two things that you really didn't know, and go back and look them up and repeat them and reteach them a little bit.
And it's a great life lesson. My boss does that to me all the time.
Right. And that's where you get your self-esteem. You have a problem that you can't work on, and then all of a sudden you get the answer, and you work through it. And that's where your whole self-esteem issue is built. So you've got to have that challenge. It's got to be tough, and then you've got to reach it.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up, and I want to thank everyone for participating, and I especially want to thank our wonderful panelists. I want to thank Dr. Whitaker especially. We know it's the first week of school, and we really appreciate her time on this and her invaluable wisdom that she brings to the seminar itself.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure, believe me.
And everybody have a great day.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.